Hello, and welcome back to Living a Culture of Life podcast by Human Life International. I'm your host, Colleen, and today I have an incredible episode to share with you. On today's show, Denisha Workizer joins us to share her story of surviving not just one, but two attempts to end her life through abortion. Denisha shares the circumstances that led her mother to seek abortions, how she eventually discovered that she was an abortion survivor as an adult, and then what the journey of healing and becoming a pro-life advocate looked like. It is an amazing episode. I really enjoyed hearing Denisha's story, and I hope that you enjoy it as well. As a quick reminder, if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or any of the audio platforms, please pause and leave us a 5-star review and subscribe to the show. And if you're listening on our YouTube channel, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that bell notification so that you can get reminded every time we release a new episode. Without further ado, please welcome Denisha Workizer to Living a Culture of Life. Welcome to the podcast, Denisha.
Oh, thank you so much, Colleen. Thanks for having me. And thank you for all that you guys do on a global level for life as well.
Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you for coming on the show today. I'm really excited for this conversation and I'm excited to have you share your story. We've had a couple abortion survivors on the podcast in the past, but it's been, I think, at least a year, if not more, since we've had any kind of personal stories like that. So I'm excited to start bringing those back.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for having all of us on.
You're welcome. Well, could you just begin by starting just to share your story with our audience? Obviously, I just mentioned you're an abortion survivor, but I know that there's so many details and everyone's story is different. So,
Yeah, that's so true. Well, a lot of people know their story. They know that their parents, were together, were maybe married, not married. They know their origin story. And I have to say, mine did not come with clarity. It began with a question that I almost didn't ask. In 2019, when New York passed the law for the Reproductive Health Act, it really caught my attention. And I had not been involved in the pro life movement up to that point, except for supporting our local pregnancy center. And when that law passed on the news, it just really attacked my heart. And I thought, wait, how is this happening? Is this real? Is this going on out there? And so my family and I went on vacation just a few days after that law passed. And we were sitting in a spa. My daughter was playing in the pool, and this thought pops in my head as I'm talking to my husband about, just this law, what's going on in the world, how did we get here? And this thought popped in my head: ask your dad if your mom ever considered having an abortion with you. And it was kind of a curiosity question. Oftentimes we personalize things we hear on the news, right? And so I thought, oh, this is just me personalizing this. So I kind of dismissed it, went on talking, and a few minutes later, it popped back in my head. And so I turned to my husband and I said, hey, do you think my mom and dad ever considered having an abortion with me? I was born in 1976, so this would be 1975. And so Roe, had passed, and he goes, I'm sure she did. And you could think that's funny for a second, but what he followed it with was, your mom was in trouble with the law at the time. She was
Mhm.
actually about to serve jail time. She had an 18-year-old daughter at home, no kids in between, and she wasn't married. So there were a lot of reasons that he pointed out in that moment that maybe she did consider it. And we kind of both said, but she didn't. And we're getting ready to leave the gate. And, as a person of faith, I believe that God prompted me. And I we got to the gate, and it was almost like my heart just started pounding. And I just felt such a quickening in my spirit to text my dad, my biological dad, and ask him if my mom ever considered having an abortion with me. And I will tell you, the results of that text was absolutely shocking to me. I had just met my dad after 30 years of us seeing each other in person. And so this was 2 years after that. So when I felt this prompting, this feeling to text my dad, the first thing I thought is, oh no, our relationship, I've only seen him now for 2 years. And now I'm about to ask him if they tried to end my life before I took my first breath. And it was weighty, it was very weighty, and so I said, I remember sitting down on a lawn chair and I thought, "Okay, my heart won't stop pounding, my palms are sweaty, I'm just gonna do it." So I texted my dad and I said, "Hey, weird question. Did you and mom ever consider having an abortion with me?" I said, "It won't bother me either way." And I hit send. And instantly my whole body calmed down and I just felt like I was doing what I was supposed to do. So about 3 hours later, my text goes off. And there's those moments in life where your life is going in one direction and all of a sudden it changes. This was that moment for me. And I was standing in a Culver's. And so it's kind of like an upgraded Dairy Queen. And I had cheese curds in one hand. I had some like chocolate concoction in the other hand. And my text goes off. And basically, my dad said, "Didn't you ever wonder why we called you a miracle baby?" She didn't just think about it, she had one. And I thought, "Wait, what?" Like, it
Yeah.
was so shocking to me. And so later that evening, when I talked to him, I found out that my mom didn't try once, but they actually tried twice to end my life. And in 1975, my mom took the abortion pills, which now we see, are being shipped into homes and dorm rooms and everything all over. But she had those pills off the market. I did mention she was in trouble with the law. So this is kind of
Mhm.
part of her story in that.
Yeah.
But in 2000, it was approved by the FDA. So this is 1975. But it was 4 white pills from what my dad described. My mom has passed away a few decades ago, so I can't talk to her about this anymore. But my
Right.
dad said there were 4 white pills, and the first 2 pills were meant to stop my heart from beating. And then the second set of 2 pills were meant to cause her body to expel me. And so they did that. They thought it worked. She had signs for a month that that had been a successful termination. And on in that was in November, and in December she went to the doctor for complications from those pills and
Mm.
found out that she was still pregnant. And she at that point had a DNC surgical abortion. And to her surprise, in February, and that was considered successful from what my dad and other family members know, it said successful. And come February that next year, my mom, another surprise came her way, and she found out that she was still pregnant. So that's how I found out my story and the
Yeah.
particularities of it.
So did she at that point just decide to choose life because she tried abortion twice and just accepted that? Or was there like, did she still consider going back for a third abortion?
That's a good question. My dad said, we tried," he said, "and then we couldn't, so then they ended up getting married a couple of months later."
Gotcha.
So I think they just decided that it wasn't working, all the attempts that they had tried, so
Interesting. Yeah. That's one thing I love about hearing different abortion survivor stories is how they all have different family situations because I know that Melissa Odin was adopted. We also had Robin Sertel on the podcast and she was raised by her biological parents. So it's always really interesting to like see how families respond once they have a child who survives abortion.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was definitely a shock to them, when they went in and found a heartbeat,
Mm.
especially after, having a DNC.
Mhm.
And so that at that point, they got married a couple of months later, and then I was born full term in July.
Wow. What a miracle.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's very shocking to find that out at 42 years old as well.
I can imagine. You think you know your family and you think you know your own story, and then to find something like that traumatic and that important that happened to you before you were even born is like that has to be really disorienting in some ways. How did you respond when you found out? Like what like effect did that have on you?
Well, I'll tell you, it changes everything, and it makes you question everything. It makes you question, was I loved? Was I, you feel very unwanted. A lot of feelings of rejection, not being worthy of life. I mean, it's very disorientating for sure.
Mhm.
So,
Looking back in hindsight, are there things that you like patterns in your family growing up that in hindsight are explained by the fact that you survived abortion just with relationship dynamics or anything like that?
a lot of family members, several of them have told me, "Denisha, this makes perfect sense," when I went public with my story. They said, "This makes perfect sense for some things that we saw in your childhood." The only thing, I was basically an only child. My sister was 18 years older, so I was the only one in the home. And I think the only thing that I felt was I always felt like I was kind of on the outside of my family looking in. And what's interesting is if you sit around with a few other survivors, many of us felt that way. It's almost a sense of we don't belong, but here we are. And that has been definitely something that we've seen really consistent in other survivors. But yeah, just a feeling of being on the outside, like no matter what I did, it wasn't enough, or just not belonging inside of that family unit. And we hear that a lot.
Yeah. I was listening to another interview you did just to prepare for this podcast, and I heard you mention in that one that you found out that your mother had another abortion a little bit before
Yeah.
the ones with you. How did that feel finding out that you lost a sibling to abortion as well?
I was told also that there were several abortions in my
Mhm.
mom's history. So, growing up as basically an only child, it was news that I really had to wrestle with, to be honest. To think that I could have had a really big family and that I
Yeah.
could have had brothers and sisters to play with and probably fight with. It was, it felt like a loss, to be honest. It's hard to know how I would have felt if that, if that would have been my reality. But at the same time, it's like you think, wow, this maybe my life was supposed to be different in God's eyes as far as what He created. So,
Yeah. We had Krista Corbello on the podcast a couple of years ago, and she lost a sibling to abortion. And one thing she was saying is that oftentimes siblings can feel a sense of survivor's guilt. Did you ever experience anything like that?
I feel that when I share my story in public, to be honest, when a lot of women come up and they'll share losing their story of losing a child to abortion, and so that feeling to me, because you think somewhere in your heart, you're like, but why did I survive and theirs didn't? Like, that's just a
Mm.
very hard reality. So I don't feel it as much, with the thought of siblings, but I definitely feel it sitting knee to knee with other women who have experienced the loss.
Yeah. No, I'm sure that's a very common feeling among abortion survivors.
Yeah.
Yeah, something to work through. You mentioned that you were afraid of that question changing your relationship with your dad. Did that end up having any effect on that? Or yeah, if you don't mind sharing. If it's
Yeah.
too personal, don't worry.
I was really nervous, to be honest. I mean, just, the heaviness of the word abortion, to
Mhm.
ask if that was the case. Never in 100 years did I think he was going to say what he said.
Mm.
Never. I thought he would say, "Yeah, we talked about it, we thought about it, but then we wanted you." This is what I was
Mhm.
thinking. So to hear that was very shocking. Now, in hindsight, it's actually drawn us a lot closer. He and you never know how things like that are gonna go, but it's drawn us a lot closer, and he really has a heart for women who have experienced losing a child to abortion.
Mm.
So he was very, I got his permission, obviously, before I started sharing my story, and he said, "Absolutely." He said, "Go." He said, The women need to hear this story." So, I
Yeah.
we've it's drawn us closer, which really surprised me. I didn't think that would be the
Well,
case.
yeah, that's so beautiful, the healing that God brings about when I guess when truth comes out in some ways, it can really help heal those old wounds.
Yeah. I hear a lot from people who tell me there's family secrets that they found out later, and maybe not around this topic, but
Mhm.
other things. And I think there's some freedom, like you said, just shedding light onto it and not trying to keep it hidden anymore.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's the whole idea of scripture, "The truth will set you free." I think
but
there's obviously real truth to that, and I think sometimes when old wounds and old things like that can come to the light, it explains things and takes away the mystery, and that helps people really be able to heal sometimes.
absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. And we've heard that over and over in other survivors as well.
mhm,
I had the privilege of serving as the healing program coordinator for the Abortion Survivors Network for 4 years. And hearing just each one of our stories is so unique.
mhm,
There's a lot of things that, there's a lot of things that are overlapped in physical conditions, sometimes even in dreams that people have had recurring throughout their life. A lot of feelings, like I was saying, about being on the outside of your family. But
mhm.
at the same time, there's every piece, and like you said, how they're raised is so different between everybody there as well. So it's from all over the country, all over different ages. We have infants all the way to people in their 80s and 90s that are survivors of abortion.
Yeah, we have, one of our affiliates in Hungary, survived an abortion, and I had him on the show. I think you were in the Faces of Choice ad, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, he was featured in that as well. And so, yeah, he's in Hungary, was survived an abortion under under communism, and
Oh,
so, yeah, it's
yeah.
really, really fascinating, all the different stories. Did you end up suffering any sort of physical effects because of the attempted abortions?
I did not. The speculation is that a double-walled uterus, is in my family line. We have other people who have that as well. So the thought is that when the DNC took place, that and this is obviously we won't know this side of glory exactly what happened, but to the best that we can tell, based on the fact that it was said to be successful, was that I probably had a twin and that the twin was, taken and then I was left. So I have no physical, ramifications. I do have immune system things. I do have things that other survivors have as well, but nothing physical.
Yeah. What did the process of healing look like for you? And then, like, going off of that, how did that translate into your work helping other people heal through the Abortion Survivors Network?
Yeah, so it was the Abortion Survivors Network that began my healing journey. I can think of 2 very distinct moments, when my healing began. One was that when you first find this out, and this is so true for so many survivors, Colleen, is you find out and you think, "I'm the only one." We don't hear about this in the news. I mean, obviously, with Melissa's work, there's so much more light shined on abortion survivors, but
Mm,
at that time, yeah, I had never heard of an abortion survivor. And if we think about it, abortion is the one medical procedure that is meant to end the life of someone, that success is ending a life, where every other intervention medically is to preserve life. So the thing I was not hearing was about other survivors, and I thought I was the only one
mm,
for a long time, and I thought, "Great, this is like" it makes you feel an outsider even more or like you don't belong. And then what does this say about me? What are people gonna think about me if they find out my story?
mhm.
And I remember when, I finally had the courage to Google, "Do babies survive abortions?" And that one moment of Googling began my healing process. I ran across Melissa, and I sent her the messiest email. We laugh about it now. She says, "I still have that." I sent her the messiest email because 'cause I'm like, "You aren't like me. Like, here's my story," and just sort of just put all these words into an email. I don't know if it made sense. And she responded back, and we connected, and then that's when I began, serving with the Abortion Survivors Network and met lifelong friends there. So that was my first, moment of healing. Melissa has written a curriculum that's on Amazon for specifically for abortion survivors, and
Oh,
we're just it's different, it's different. I actually lead a ministry called Reclaimed Story, and we help women heal from the pain in their past. And what's ironic about that is I began that ministry 16 days before finding out my survivor story. So it wasn't about my survivor story, it was about more of my story. And as you can imagine, as an abortion survivor, many of us, if we were raised in our biological home, there's still that sense. A lot of times there was abuse or neglect or something going on there. Otherwise, they wouldn't have tried to terminate, the baby in the beginning. So going through that, and hearing other survivor stories, looking them in the eye. I mean, I remember the first time there was 3 of us in a room, and we all just looked at each other like, "We are not alone." And I think that's where the Lord really began to heal my story. And
mhm.
then my second distinct moment, was when out of nowhere, a woman called me on a Tuesday afternoon, and I answered the phone, and she didn't say hello. And I am in the healing process, okay? I'm actually doing my own healing work before I started leading the groups at the time, and I answer my phone, and she says, "I understand you know a lot about abortion." And just my mouth dropped. I was like, "Oh, okay, here all right, Lord, I guess we're doing this right now." And it turned out a friend of ours, a mutual friend, knew my story. This woman went to her, shared that she was about to have an abortion. She didn't know how to talk about the
Mm.
topic of life. So she said, "Call my friend. She knows a lot about abortion." And I know, I was so sh I can't tell you how shocked I was. I remember stopping in that conversation and I didn't. I mean, I was learning my story. I was learning so much in the pro-life world. I was healing. And I remember when she said that and I just stopped for a second. I was like, Lord, show me your heart for this woman. I don't know what to say to her. I don't know at that time, now I've been about 6 years in the movement, but at
Mhm.
that time I just thought, I don't know what to say. So Lord, show me your heart for her. And she tells me that she is 7 weeks pregnant, which is exactly when my mom took the abortion pills. Then she says, "I'm trying to decide between taking the abortion pills or having a surgical abortion. What do you think?" And my heart was just taken back, and I thought, "Oh, Lord, you're doing something here," because that's my story, right?
Yeah.
So I listened to her and but I just kind of felt this like, put that in your back pocket. Don't charge with your story. Although I was, didn't really know what I was doing. So I listened to hers, asked her how did she decide to have an abortion, what were her circumstances in life, etc. She said
Mhm.
everybody told her that it was just a blob of tissue. That's what
Mm.
her mom told her. That's what everybody was telling her. It's no problem, go get it taken care of. And as I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, this is the lie that my mom had too. And so we talked through it and we talked through I knew a little bit I knew enough to be dangerous, I think, at that point. And so I said, "Do you know at 7 weeks, your baby has a different heartbeat than yours? Your baby can feel pain. Did you know that they have a different DNA code?" Right? Like I listened to a couple apologetics at the time and shared that with her. And then at the end, she said, "Denisha," I shared my story with her after about 45 minutes of talking. And when I shared it, she says, "Denisha, you're like my baby." And in those 4 words, I thought, I'm supposed to share my story. And so that was the second moment of healing for me because it was almost a cloak of shame that I had,
Mhm.
that I wasn't wanted. And so healing, finding that I wasn't alone, and then talking with this woman. So she didn't know me from anybody, right? But she allowed me to go and pick her and her, baby who's growing in her inside of her body up. And we went to our local pregnancy center. I drove her over there. She saw an ultrasound of her baby, and 2 days later, she called me back and said she was choosing life. She was gonna keep her baby. And I
That's lo
thought, yeah, and that was my second really distinct moment of healing because I thought, "Lord, I will do this for the rest of my life. If this is why I was saved, if this is what you're calling me to at this season, I will do this for the rest of my life in sharing." And so those were my 2 biggest moments of healing.
Wow. So that's what you said prompted you to start sharing your story publicly then from that moment?
Yes.
What did what did that process look like? Did you just start calling people up and saying, "I have a story I can share"? Like, what was it like to become a speaker in that way?
So, interesting enough, I was a pastor at my church, for 10 years, and so God always kinda takes one thing and builds on it, right, in our stories, and so I remember they came to me and said, "We want you to start preaching." And there's a whole lot of thoughts around, having female preachers, and so I'd been public speaking for 5 years before. Now, if I hadn't done that, if God hadn't set me to do that, no way would I have been prepared to share something so very personal to me. So the first thing I did was Faces of Choice. That was the very first thing, and that was a commercial featuring many of us as survivors, and was supposed to be during the Super Bowl in 2020. So end of 19, I find out the beginning of 19, end of 19 was Faces of Choice, and then from there, through Melissa's just incredible, encouragement and her training, they had speakers training that we went through and just equipped us for more of the pro-life, world. And so, yeah, then I began sharing at pregnancy center galas, and they're my heroes, right? They're
Wow.
heroes to this, and I love that you guys connect you're doing it worldwide, with movement. That's amazing. And so that was kind of where I started in really friendly territory, and then I've shared at different conferences, churches, and also at schools, and that's one of my favorite
Mm.
things too. Just to have kids when they see I have an ultrasound, a video of 7 weeks and 12 weeks.
Mhm.
And so I play that, and the kids, I'm like, "You can't unsee this now."
Mhm.
So that's how my journey started and has evolved over the past 6 years.
Yeah. No, I can attest. I first heard Melissa speak when I was 14, I think. So, it's definitely it was beautiful hearing her story unfold. Each time I heard it, there was more to the story, but I can also it definitely made an impact on me. And it's funny hearing it so young because 'cause I've interviewed a couple, like you and Robin Sirkel both found out that they were abortion survivors, later and didn't know there was any other abortion survivors, and it was always a little disconcerting for me because I was like, "Well, I found out when I was 14, I thought this was common knowledge." So, it's good to have kids know about it very young.
Yeah.
Not very, very young, but, you know.
Right, age appropriate. There was a very different, when I speak to middle schoolers or high schoolers, there's a very different conversation we have. So to keep it age appropriate, but when you see the kids, they don't understand either, and the questions they ask at the end, it
Mhm.
definitely humanizes the unborn baby like nothing else.
Yeah.
I think we have a position as survivors to do that.
Is there anything that stands out to you when you give talks at schools that, either questions they ask or insights that they have that you wouldn't expect younger kids to have?
They have a lot of questions.
Okay.
I remember particularly, I was actually in a girls group. They did breakouts after the presentation, and so I was in a girls group, and 3 big football players came in the room, and they came in and they said, "We have a question for you. What about kids with disabilities?"
Mm,
And I said, "That's a great question." And I said, "Well, let me ask you a question." I said, "Do you have a little guy on the team?" One that can't maybe doesn't catch or run as fast as you, and they both started laughing. They all were laughing like, "Oh, yeah, that's so and so." And I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, since he's not as strong and he's not as fast as you guys," I said, "why don't we just kill him?"
mm,
And I said it just stopped. The whole room about just dropped out, and they looked at me like, "No, man, we like him. We really like him. Why would you say that?" And I said, "That's what we're saying when we're trying to determine with a child with disabilities, if we're gonna do that. Can you see?" And they were like, "That's all we have, ma'am," and they walked out. And the teacher looks at me, she goes, "Good play." They have so many questions, and I think if we can relate it to them and to their
mhm.
world, that makes a big difference. They have
Yeah,
lots of questions. It was fun. I think it's a blast to go to schools.
yeah. It's also the energy and the inspiration of youth is always so important. The more they learn, the more enthusiastic they are about defending life. You see this at the March for Life and all the
Yes.
youth rallies and all of that. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
very fun.
Yeah, we have pretty good, because we do chastity, education for students as well as teaching them about abortion, but we always have very positive feedback in the mission field from students that learn about it, and they're just like, "Yes, let's go." And it's like, I think sometimes as a cynical American, you're like, "Oh, yeah, good. This is great." The next generation,
Yes.
is really embracing truth, which is so good, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's
So
always
true,
great to hear.
and I remember one of our survivors, she was in, chastity training, and she
Right.
was doing it in schools years ago, and she's a survivor, and she said, "Nobody told me I had a choice." So she
Mhm.
has it's Priscilla Hurley, she's amazing, and she shares her story very openly. She has really a triple effect, that abortions had on her life. She's a survivor, she's experienced losing a child to abortion, and she worked in an abortion clinic. And
Whoa.
so those 3 things she wanted to help women. And the
Yeah.
one thing she kept saying about chastity, though, is she said, "I never knew that was an option until someone told me. And by then, it was too late." But she said, "I wish someone had told me." So, love that you guys are out there in the schools teaching. So good.
No, it's so important of doing education on every level and just all the work you're doing in schools as well, especially to people here in America. It's sometimes a little bit harder to get into schools here, but the
Yeah.
younger generation is so receptive. And I think a lot of people are just yearning for truth. And when they hear it, they embrace it. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And
How would
having schools know too about pregnancy centers, about their local pregnancy center, that's something I have found interesting that a lot of schools don't know. So I always ask that they bring in a representative from the
I
pregnancy
mean,
center so that we can, because when I'm going to come and they might think, wow, my eyes were really opened, but then I'm going to leave. And when their
mhm.
friend gets pregnant, when they see something that happens, they need a local source to tap into there.
Yeah. No, pregnancy centers do so much, and just the amount of service that they provide for women, it's a crime how they get slammed in the media, and we're told pro-lifers are not pro-women because they pregnancy centers do so much for women at every level, and it's just incredible.
They're the heroes. They're the
Yeah.
heroes. They're the ones walking knee to knee, sitting knee to knee with women. I always think about the television, right? If I see
Mm.
something on television that makes me sad, maybe it's the kittens and the puppies that need to be adopted, or I change the channel. And what I love about pregnancy centers is they don't change the channel. They choose to sit down knee to knee, heart to heart with those women and help them during the biggest decision of their life. And
Sure.
so, yeah, they really are the real heroes out there.
So true. They're the ones say like all of the different levels of pro-life activism are all important in different ways, but pregnancy centers are really just the grassroots. Let's meet the women where they are and help save lives, meeting women in the trenches. And
Yes.
it's so incredibly important.
Yeah, very true.
What role did your faith play in your healing journey?
Huge. Uh, just as my story before finding out I was a survivor, faith is
Okay.
what really held me through. Knowing that this may have been a surprise to me, but this wasn't a surprise to the Lord
Mhm.
was a huge help. Um, One passage I held on to is from Psalms 11, where it talks about when the foundations are destroyed. And that's what I felt like. My foundations were destroyed when I found out about my story. It says the Lord, the Lord is still on his throne. And then down a few verses later, it says that the righteous will see his face. And so that's what I just kept telling myself is my foundations have been stripped away, but it's not a surprise to God. He's still on his throne. He is still
Mm,
Lord of my life. And I will see his face in this. I will see his hand in it. And I've really been able to see him derive purpose from that pain. It was not easy. I did not come to the decision of, oh, I want to go share my story publicly because we get a lot of backlash from that as well. But that one woman calling me, and now since then, there's been many, many stories, many, many conversations with even people who are pro-choice. So
mm,
there's so much purpose that comes out of our pain. And I'm never going to be a fighter, to be honest. I'm going to be an advocate. I'm going to be passionate for life, but I don't have the fighting spirit. I have the let's sit down and talk about this. Maybe we can be unified without being in agreement. Maybe I can open your eyes to something. And so
mhm,
that's my position, and so I just really see where God has brought purpose from extreme pain and confusion, to be honest.
yeah. Do you find that when you share your story, people open up about their own, like, things that have happened in their life? You had this woman who was obviously considering abortion who chose life, but what impact does sharing your story have on the listeners?
Oh, that's one of my favorite parts, okay? So if I share my story somewhere in public, whether it's 100 people or, 1,000 people plus, tens of thousands, when you share in a big, I think 2,000 was the biggest, but as you share in public, there's always a line of people who wants to speak, who wants to talk to the speaker. And they've shared their stories. I remember at one event, I had somebody come up and for a very long time just stood there and stared at me when it was their turn and just stared at me. And I thought, I am not sure what is about to happen. And then they told me, I'm like you, I'm a survivor too.
Mhm,
So as we're sharing our stories, it brings out survivor stories. Sometimes they've never told anyone. This particular person had only told their spouse, and
mm,
nobody else knew because of that shame. So to hear a survivor sharing their story and God using it for purpose, I think that was really healing for them. So about
mhm.
probably 20 to 30 seconds, which is awkwardly long when there's a line, just stared at me. And then the first words out were, I'm like you. I'm one of you. And so I just said, "Can I hug you?" And so just hugged them, connected them with the network at the time, and, so that you find other survivors, you find people I always share about the forgiveness and love that I have for my mom. She was one of the strongest people I've ever known. So in
Mhm,
my story, you're not going to hear any condemnation from my mom, you're gonna hear love and understanding and forgiveness.
mm.
And so that's something that I think really plays a role also for women. So we'll have women stand in line, and I've had them tell me, your story just brought healing to my story. And so lots of different ways. Fathers come and tell me that they were, a part of an abortion that they didn't want or did want at the time, and how much that it was just healing to hear the forgiveness in my story as well. But we can't give away what we don't have. And that's something that I've experienced from Jesus in my life. Just faith has been a huge part. So that's something that I get to give away out there while we're sharing.
Was it a journey to get to the point of being able to forgive your mom, or had the fact that she had died so many years previously, did that kind of help create an emotional buffer for you?
That's a great question. At first, I was mad. And to be really honest, and here I was working in ministry at the time when I found out my story. I was angry with the Lord and I was angry with my mom. I was angry that it went underground for so long. And it took understanding, learning more about other survivor stories, learning about how much they loved and have forgiven. Some are further down their story walk than I was. And so
Yeah.
just understanding more of where my mom came from,
Mhm.
that brought a lot of forgiveness to my heart. And then I will never forget that. And then I kind of, to be honest with you, Colleen, I held some anger towards the Lord, and He's big enough to handle that, but I held some anger until that day when that woman called me, and then I was like, "Oh, you're up to something that I don't understand, and you are gonna use this for a purpose." And I'm
Yeah.
all in on that day. So it took me some time to forgive. Hearing my dad's side of the story in detail also
Mhm.
opened up a lot of compassion for what my mom went through. So it was
Mm.
a journey. It was not right away. I would love to say that right away I went to scripture and forgave, and but I had to walk through the prayer of I choose to forgive my mom for. And sometimes that was for trying to take my life.
Mhm.
Sometimes that was I remember one time praying, "Lord, I choose to forgive my mom for paying someone to take my life," because that struck me one day. And then now fast forward, now I can say, "Lord, I'm so glad this is my story." And I never thought in the early probably year and a half that I would ever get to the place where I would say, "I'm so glad that I survived 2 abortion procedures."
Yeah. I think it is natural to have all of those levels to work through. Like, in some ways, it's nice you wanna be able to say, "I forgive" immediately and not have to go through the messy work of getting there emotionally, but I think it, like, in a sense, can make it more meaningful in the long run when you've actually had to kind of wrestle with it and it's authentic and not just a, "I'm saying I forgive you because I feel like I should."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
It is definitely a process, but one I don't think I could have skipped steps to.
yeah, yeah. What was the reaction from your friends and family when you started going public with your story? Did they already know and you had, like, told them ahead of time that you were gonna share it, or were they surprised by this?
Both. Both. I definitely got permission from my dad, my sister, because my sister knew about it as well. So once I talked to
Mm,
her, she confirmed the details that my dad had given me. And I talked to a few family members that are still alive that I thought just could be impacted by it, and I wanted to make sure I had their permission to share.
yeah.
As far as friends and family, or friends and distant family even, I think it was a shock. And then the question was, why would you share something like that? And that's that shame piece, right? That's saying, why would you do that? Why would you share that? And so I had to walk through the whys behind it with a few people
Mhm,
to help just to help that process move forward. And I remember here I'm serving at church and I'm starting to Faces of Choice had come out and what that went like viral real fast. And I remember the next Sunday at church, I got out of my car, I opened my car door, put my foot down, and there was a woman standing there. And she shared with me how when she was 19 years old, and she was probably at the time in her 60s, she shared her story of losing a child to abortion. She said, "Only my husband knows this." She said, "Thank you for giving me permission to talk about it." And it dawned on me that in many of our churches, we don't talk about that. And so there's a lot of women that think that that is the one thing that God can't forgive because they don't hear it talked about. And so that morning, I actually was about an hour late to teaching a Bible study class that I was supposed to teach. And I had talked to 4 women before that. I didn't pursue it. They came up to me, saw the video, and shared their story. And to me, that was really powerful. And I thought, not everybody may be for me sharing this, but
mhm.
I think there's a whole lot more that need to hear it than the people who may think, why are you sharing that? That's a shameful thing to share. So I think it's worth it.
Yeah, how beautiful that God can bring so much healing to people through your witness there.
Yeah, and all of us as survivors, right? It's just such a
Yeah.
unique place. Even recently, the one thing I think we hear a lot is that a thing?" Or,
Mm,
"I didn't know that was a thing." And
Yeah.
I always joked with Melissa about if I could have $1 for every time someone said, "Is that a thing?" And she's like, "Why do they always say that?" It's so true. "Is that a thing? Whoa, I didn't know that was a thing." So, I think just eye-opening to the point where we are the face of choice. We
Yeah.
are the babies who survived abortions, and so I just it's a very unique place to hold, and it's definitely not for the faint of heart. Or you strengthen up in the Lord, that's for sure to do it.
It's very countercultural too, because the whole culture says that in preborn children aren't actually children and abortion is a choice, and then you're standing there saying, like, a
That choice.
living embodiment of that's wrong.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very interesting, so
Where do you think you've mentioned a couple times that abortion survivors experience shame. Where do you think that shame comes from? Is it from the fact that they feel like they weren't wanted as a child? Is it shame that they survived in a weird way? What's, like, at the root of that, or is it multifaceted?
I think it's multifaceted from the stories that I've sat with. The difference between guilt and shame, right? Guilt is
Mhm.
I did something wrong, like I lied.
Mhm.
Shame tells us you're a liar.
Mhm.
Okay. So the shame comes in, it's our identity. Shame attacks our identity, where guilt attacks our behavior. So in our identity of feeling like we were unwanted, well, really, at the time, right, it was about us, but it's not like our parents knew us and knew our personalities and rejected us, and it's not
Mm.
like it was their life circumstances that really spoke into that. But it does leave shame of feeling unwanted. That very the first 5 years of our lives, how important those years are to our identity, to our just our belief about everything in the world. So
Mhm.
all of that sort of comes crashing down, those foundations being shaken when we realize that we weren't wanted. We were here in spite of someone's decision. And even for the survivors that have physical limitations, and people,
Mhm.
even ask, what do why is that? Why do you have this? And to know that that's our reason. I think a lot of it goes back to the identity and that shame piece. But at the same time, I think what you said is very multifaceted, that it can be both and. It's the kind of the tension of both and that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Could you tell our audience a little bit about your ministry, Reclaimed Story?
Yeah, so I started that 16 days before finding out my story, and I thought, "Lord, haven't we done enough reclaiming?" The word reclaimed means to rescue from an undesirable state and restore to the previous natural state. And I love that because it's God's rescuing and restoring. It's Genesis to Revelation. So we help women find healing from the pain of their past. And so we do that through life groups. We do that through our podcast. We do that through a lot of online resources that we have. So it's been a journey, and I've had to separate the pro life work that I do from the ministry because of the fact I realized when posts were colliding, it was women who have experienced abortion were very like, "Oh, I can't go here."
Mm.
And so we actually have a testimony from a woman named Myra who came and had a lot of regret from her abortion in her young years and
Mhm.
came through our life group. And then one day I said, "Hey," I said, "I have some encouragement for you." And she turned to me and she said, "Not you." And I
Mm.
was like, "Oh, what I do?" And I said, she goes, "I've seen your story online." And she said, I don't want you to talk to me about this." And we ended up talking, and it was beautiful, and she has found healing. Now she is leading abortion recovery groups, which blesses my heart because 'cause I'll never forget that. So when we see each other, I'll say, "Not you," and she's like, "I now lead abortion recovery groups." I'm like, "You're amazing. God's so good." So, yeah, so we began to start separating those messages. So now, I have speaking and everything separate from Reclaim Story, but it is such a gift to walk alongside women with no mask. There's no expectation of them coming to this, even though we're faith-based. They get to
Mhm.
come as they are, and the Lord takes it from there. So it's pretty amazing.
Oh, that's beautiful. And then finally, where can people find you if they want to either go through your, like, contact your ministry and are interested in that or wanna follow you on social media? Where can they find you?
Yeah, two websites. One is reclaimedstory.com. That's the ministry for women. And
Mhm.
then two, my name, DenishaWorkizer.com. You can find out about retreats and speaking engagements, or if your school or organization is interested, you can find me at my name, which is easy, right? Denisha Workizer. And then on socials, either at Reclaim Story or Denisha Workizer as well.
Perfect, and I'll drop those in the description as well so people can follow them there. So,
Awesome.
perfect. Well, Denisha, thank you so much for coming on today. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been great to just hear your story, and it's so amazing to hear how God works through people's lives.
Amen. Amen. Well, Colleen, thank you so much for all that you guys are doing as well.
You're welcome. And to all of our audience, please like and subscribe. Please let us know how Denisha's story impacted you in the comment section. And definitely be sure to check out her social media and keep on living the culture of life. God bless.